I was asked one time by my son about making a documentary about my family, and um, it was something I had started to do back in 1997. I had an apartment. Uh, my son and my wife had left, um, and I went through something that they call parental separation anxiety. It's a real thing, um, and it made me into somebody that I didn't want to be, and it took me down a road that I was able to correct within a couple years. When you lose someone, there's a grieving process involved, uh, and like everything else, I'll refer to Pat Riley and his Hinduism beliefs uh, that everybody has their own road to walk. Um, that speaks true to me. Uh, and Pat Riley and Phil Jackson both believed in uh, the same type of philosophies as far as each individual person uh, has their own set of skills to contribute. And the best thing to do is to stand back, explain the philosophy of something, and allow it to evolve. Uh, like the Bulls teams did under Phil Jackson, and the Lakers teams did, and the Heat teams did under Pat Riley. And that's kind of what helped me get out of that hole, was to let go of the control aspect of things, realize that I'm not in control. That's an illusion for a narcissist, to believe that you're in control of anything. You can throw temper tantrums, and it'll help you as far as getting rid of the anxiety inside you, but it doesn't really do anything to rectify the situation. But when I did, I sat down and I started to write on a computer, and I hadn't used a computer for a very long time. But I started to document some of the issues I had when I was a child, so that my son, when he grew up, could understand who his dad was. Because I came to the realization that I was never going to be anything more uh, than I'm now. Um, I told him that when I was a child, in this autobiography, I had a friend, and I had called him friendly. He was my invisible friend, kind of like a Casper friend or something. But whenever I got nervous or scared when I was growing up, all the way back to Karundu, I would always go to my room and play with my invisible friend, Friendly. Um, and uh, he helped me get through the whole Billy thing when Billy came home. Because it was a traumatic experience, especially for a 3 or 4 year old, um, to realize that you had to handle something that no one else could really help you with. Um, as time went on, I started to explain to him um, the influx of my stepbrothers and stepsister uh, was strange to me, because that's when they started to come around, was about the time that we moved from Dayton. Um, my brother Marty and my sister Jackie both came to Waynesville with us and started school. Marty ended up going back to Loveland High School, or Loveland Elementary, which left me and Jackie here for a while until he came back around. Um, During those years, there was a lot of issues with addictions and defining roles in the house that I lived in. My father worked a lot, and he worked second shift mostly. So it was usually just me and my mom and my sister. And if my mom left, it was just me and my sister. And my sister really became sort of motherly to me, um, because she stayed home a lot with me and helped to guide me whenever I had issues. I would talk to her, and we developed a strong relationship until about the time that she went into the military. And once she did that, I started to become best friends uh, with my brother Marty. I say that because I always had Billy with me, and it wasn't a friendship. Um, it was a brotherhood, and it was very difficult because of the resentment uh, that he carried inside him towards me, and it caused me a lot of guilt because I understood what he resented me about, and there was nothing I could do about it. It's hard to explain. It would take a clinical psychologist to really get into it. Uh, as time went on, um, Billy overachieved, and I was very proud of him. But at the same time, I was immature, and I started to notice that a lot of his successes uh, seemed to mean more than anything that I did. And I used that as a crutch to follow further down my older brother's path of addiction. Um, as I did that, I got to a point to where I started to use, and he went to prison, which changed my life uh, because then it was just me, and I was alone with the responsibilities of trying to be a brother to Billy. And my mother's addiction was an issue because she was gone a lot, uh, chasing her demons. And so I did the best that I could to try to be inclusive and to try to mentor him. But I know not his feelings and I know not his path. So it was difficult for me to really understand what it was I needed to do. As time went on, I started to date and get involved in relationships with females, and built up a little bit more resentment in him towards me because I wasn't spending the time with him that I used to. And so um, he started to, I guess you would say, engulf himself in trying to defeat the odds and graduate from school, which he did, and I was very proud of him. I've never met anybody who had as many issues to overcome as my brother Billy, and he did overcome them, and he did it without ever having any negative coping skills except for seeking love and seeking acceptance. And he did that without any addictions that I know of, which is an amazing thing that I brought up to my older brother Marty one time when we were discussing uh, shortcomings and reasons to use. I said I use because I like it, I enjoy it. I don't use to get through anything, and I don't use because I have to. And it doesn't cause my problems when I use. What it does is give everybody something to point at when I fail, which is different than a lot of people look at it, but it's my truth. It's not for anyone else. I've accomplished some amazing things while I've used. Uh, I've also accomplished some amazing things when I was sober, and I've accomplished even more failures on both sides of the fence. Because I try, I don't shy away, and I don't cop out, and I don't hide behind the fact, uh, you know, that I have an issue, or I have something that I can use as an issue to say, look, this is why I failed, which is what a lot of addicts do, is they hide behind it as an excuse to say I failed because I'm an alcoholic. No, you're an alcoholic who failed. I look at that totally different. My brother had a handicap. Uh, he didn't succeed or fail because of that handicap. It was something he carried with him while he did his thing. And I never heard him hide behind the fact that he had communication issues. And it had to have been frustrating because there's nobody asked to repeat themselves more than Billy Ham. And I would see the frustration in his eyes, and sometimes he would just shake his head like, I'm not even going to try again. And I would walk away and cry. That was a battle that I can't tell you how proud I am of how he handled all the frustration that he went through in his life, not including the surgeries or the harshness from human beings who seek to exploit people's shortcomings so that they can look like they're cooler in somebody's eyes somewhere. When I got into elementary school, uh, my dad held me back in the 6th grade because I wasn't really being able to maintain, and it was because I was starting to use. I started to find other things to do besides my homework, and so he was going to correct me, and we discussed it, and I did. I took it over again, but I became one of the kids that was a step ahead at that point, and I started to become sort of a leader in sports, in social activities, uh, but I suffered even more with my homework because I just wasn't interested. Um, as time went on, my social circle started to expand outside of everyday school activities and home, and I got a job later on at the Holiday Inn when I was 16. I started to hang around some people from Cincinnati, and I was dating, at that time, and I started to date some people I worked with, and they drove, uh, and by the time I was in the 7th or 8th grade, I was mobile, and I was able to get out, and I really found my way by being able to socialize. I started to get into going to concerts. I started to get into going out hunting, fishing, and doing things like that. And I started to really realize what I wanted to be in life, which was alone. And so I would have so many different things, so many different places to do that I spent most of my time introducing myself because I never did stay in one place too long. Um, and that's when I met his mother. And we dated through high school. Uh, we became friends, and I became a part of her family, and I stopped socializing. And the reason that I did that was mostly because of her jealousy issues. I became friends with who she was friends with because I didn't want to have to go through the scrutiny of explaining why I had this friend or that friend. And it affected me in a positive way because I wasn't really good at picking relationships. And so I got comfortable in that relationship, and she was a really good friend to me, and we had a child. I can't sit here and tell you that we were ever lovers. I think we were just really good friends who were uh, trying to be in love the whole time we were married. And when it ended, I think we both felt cheated, and there was a lot of issues uh, between us, a lot of animosity. And so I did what I always do, uh, which is I ghosted. I just stopped communication, and I didn't reciprocate any type of efforts to reconcile. I had a hard time dealing with the loss of my son. I had never been through that before, and he was only about a year old. And I was just getting used to that new father feeling when all of a sudden he was gone. And I needed somebody to blame, and I was managing stores at that time. So I had to be a professional until 4 o'clock. But once 5 o'clock hit, I started going out, and I started seeking that release, or that thing that could make me forget that my son's not at home with me. And it became a very volatile time for me, and I had to get a grip on it because I started to have some trouble with the law. And so I ended up downtown uh, about the time that my son and wife had left. And I met some people who really influenced my life because I was never so lost as I was when I went downtown working for BP. I was a shell of a human being. I had nothing inside of me except for just resentment towards the world. And I was able to mask that. And I was able to do that and learn about a new culture, one that I had left as a child. And it enamored me because there were so many familiarities with the city and the attitude and the things that were inside of me that I didn't really understand started to become more clear to me. And I had a person sort of guide me through it, who's probably the greatest person, philosophy-wise, that I've ever been around. And her name's Stephanie Shipp. We began to have conversations about society, love, family, and things like that. And we both were learning from each other so many things. Um, and I became friends with her and her husband, Albert, her boyfriend, Albert. And their family really took me in, including Miss Michelle Miles. And we all became sort of a team at that BP with the rest of the crew there. And all of us were very good friends. But it came to an end because of my, drinking and addiction, according to most. I think it was because I was in over my head in retail management, at a very young age. So whatever the cause was, it was over, and I got my unemployment check, and I had too much time on my hands, and I started running around doing the same things that I had been doing. I just didn't have anywhere else to go or any reason to stop. I got my PSP check from BP, and I wanted to reinvest it into another job, but my lifestyle became expensive. So I started to date or look for someone to date, and I dated 2 people, and I ended up meeting my old high school lover and best friend one night under some really bad circumstances. Um, and we had a first date that I'm sure has been repeated quite a few times because um, when I start drinking, it becomes very apparent the things that I laugh about while I'm talking, which is the detachment from really caring or being invested in things. I always give it that laugh because I know that people are going to look at me and shake their head because they don't get it, and I don't get it either. It's just I don't care. There's a numbness about some things, and if I do care, it's a bad situation in its own right because when I met her, she said she didn't want to go out, uh, and then they left the bar, and I actually followed them, and I demanded um, to talk to her still because I was not ready to close the night down. And it sounds bad, but I think everybody at the end of it was laughing because me and her got thrown out of Perkins and ended up in a relationship that quickly ended up in a marriage, a child, and a tumultuous 20 years, the best 20 of my life. So after working at a cemetery with all kinds of just situations, I mean almost like landmines that you get through. We left our hometown cemetery and moved away from our parents again, and I ended up going back to my job at Speedway, which I had started before going to the cemetery, and worked there for about 3 years out in the field. I was working at the Enon Help Desk office before I went to the cemetery. And I was glad they accepted me back in 2003, and I stayed there till 2005, and we lived in Kettering, and then we ended up moving to Centerville, and Centerville's always been kind of a hometown for me. It's where I lived when my first son was born. It's where I lived when I met my second wife, and it's always been a good town for me. As I worked there in Centerville, uh, I got a store that was really a hometown store. I started to become part of the community. Got to meet a lot of people, and as I discussed earlier, I met Mr. Seminarelli, the vice president of Marathon, through some issues. It was a highly scrutinized store because there's a lot of people who have someone that high ranking in the oil company and the parent company of Speedway to stop in, and if he complains, it's an immediate complaint. But I moved on to West Carrollton to the Speedway there in the middle of town on Central, and I worked there for about a year. And I met some people there, and we became sort of family, like you do when you work in retail. And once that came to a conclusion, I went to a company called Triumph Energy, and worked there for 15 years. I was at Centerville and Whip Roads, where I hired in at. Then I went to West Carrollton to the BP there on Central, across from my old store, and moved out to Jeffersonville, and then was moved to Middletown, Eaton, Sunoco, Middletown, Sunrise, Sunoco, um, with the drive-through, and then after that, I moved back to Far Hills, and then tragedy struck a friend of mine who managed the University of Dayton, Sunoco, and I ended up going down there and working there for 12 years. Uh, I had an incident where some things happened in my personal life that slipped over into my boss's house, if you will, and his best friend and neighbor in West Carrollton destroyed my marriage. Um, it was doomed to be destroyed, no doubt. It had just ran its course, and we had fallen out of love. Um, but when you have something of that magnitude happen in your personal life, and then you've got to stare your boss in the eyes, who was definitely not on your side of of the event, um, it really took a toll on me mentally. And then finally, after being humiliated, and then moved out of my University of Dayton store and placed down off 275 on Sharon Road at the Sunoco at $5 a gallon gas in a truck that got 5 miles to the gallon because it had a 5.7 motor in it. I lost my house because of our company's insurance not honoring, you know, my $100 a week or $80 a week donation for 10 years to insurance. And then the first time my wife had surgery on her foot, they say that there was a pre-surgery authorization that wasn't signed, and they refused to pay it. And I went to court, and they said, well, we're going to cut your check. And I think it ended up being about 65-70% of my net pay. And I lost my house. And I ended up, a friend of mine was looking for a new tenant in his house, and we ended up moving out to Morrow on Osceola Road. And after we did that, I ended up losing my job after 15 years at Triumph Energy. And my wife was working at the Save-A-Lot in Blanchester, and we began to struggle enough to where we decided that our relationship wasn't working out enough for the effort being put in. And on May the 15th, 2015, that was pretty much the end of it. I lived there for a while after that, and then we both moved. And I moved in with my parents because my dad had just had an aortic aneurysm, and my mother had Alzheimer's, and she also had cancer and was diagnosed 6 months. So I moved home and fell right into all that responsibilities and struggled with it because once again I had lost my family. Only this time I had lost more relationships that I was more enamored by and had been there longer. And that separation anxiety caused me to have abandonment issues, and it also caused me to have resentment as I watched my mother fight, and she made it for a few years, and then she finally died. During the time that I was moved from my store out to Morrow, my older brother, Marty, my best friend, he died in October 2013. And so that was added into the humiliation of my family falling apart, my job, my losing my home, his death, and then having somebody chastise me out of my store and send me down to Cincinnati and financially destroyed, and then to limp back home, failed marriage, failed job, pretty much a failed life, and then to watch my mother go through what she did. And my father recovered quickly, and I started looking for an out, and I ran into some old friends, and we did what we do, is we depended on each other, basically to use, manipulate, and to love. And in the end, what won was the rest of the world because of necessity, greed, opportunity, ignorance. So I ended up with my dad, and then I ended up getting in trouble, and then I went to prison. And I went to prison for a year, but it was actually, it took me about 3 years to get out of all the different ways that you get controlled by the government once you get in a situation. And when I got out of prison, uh, about 72 hours later, I found out that my wife had been lonely for too long, and she didn't have the heart to tell me that we weren't going to be friends any longer. She had been living, uh, you know, with my dad, and while I was in jail. And of course, when you're in jail, you start to have these thoughts of reconciliation and how 20 years is coming up and all those things. And then I got out, and like I said, 72 hours later, I found out that it wasn't going to be the case. And on that day, I found out that my brother had been in an accident training a horse in Xenia, Ohio. And so me and my dad drove up to see, what the damages were. We knew he fell off the horse. We didn't know what the significance was. And when we got there, it killed him. And so I had lost my other brother. So his wife decided to go and tell my sister, because my brother was close to my sister, closer than he was to a lot of people. And they found my sister dead in her apartment. And so when my brother's widow came back, she said, "Your sister's gone too." And I looked at my dad, and my dad looked at me, and neither one of us cried. It was almost like a declaration of war by God on me, is how I looked at it. And I want you to remember my first son is growing up this whole time, and I barely mentioned him. And that's how quickly you get caught up in life and lose a son. Because I don't have the relationship I could have had with him if I would have done something different. And I'll die never knowing what that was. Because all I ever did was try to love him. And I caused him a lot of problems, because if I went over there, I couldn't get along with his mother, and then he would get chastised when he went home, ask questions and things like that. And it just became a situation that wasn't beneficial to my new family, my old family, or me. For me and my son to be around each other, even though I wanted to be around him more than anything, I didn't want to be around him and watch him sulk, and I didn't want to watch him cry. So I just terminated the relationship, because what the hell else are you going to do? So I tried to get through my probation period through the Warren County courts and failed miserably. But they ended up terminating my probation. And I got a job at Pilot 68. I got a job at True North in Springboro. And I told both of them when I hired in, I didn't tell them I was on probation, but I told them the first one, it makes me a manager of a store. I'll probably work for you, but at the point I'm at right now, I don't think I can do it. So I work both of them part-time, and I'm good at what I do. So they both came to me wanting me to get into management pretty quickly. I ended up taking a management position. And I failed miserably, and I felt bad for that. But I had to get a grip on my addiction and my mental issues, and that had to take priority over any type of other relationship I had, so that I could focus on the young man that just walked in the room and allow him to teach me that I'm okay. And I love him to death, so I'm going to get off here. I thank God for second chances. I wish everybody got them.